The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
So here's the agenda. First, I want to talk about QBS, what it is, define it, make sure we are on the same page. Number two, let's talk a little bit about the background of QBS and how this is viewed across the industry. It's important to keep in mind. Then we'll briefly chat about what we recommend at CPE. What's our take on this hot button issue? And then we'll give a few tips and best practices for going along with that recommendation. So starting out, what is QBS? If you've never heard of it before, it stands for qualifications-based selection. So QBS, qualifications-based selection. What this means, it's all in the name, but by definition, only qualifications are considered in the selection of these services, anything that goes through QBS, and there are literally no price factors. So no fee, no cost, no anything else. Money is not included. Traditionally, the way that this works in architecture and engineering services is that we request purely for the qualifications of the competing firms. And then once our evaluation team on the client side has identified the top ranked or most qualified, best qualified firm, then we notify them and we bring them solely into a negotiation process and hope to mutually agree upon a fee at that time that seems fair to all. That's the definition of how QBS has been run historically. And that is, as we will see, how the A&E community likes it to proceed. There have been some changes there where clients use the term QBS, but then throw price in there. Technically speaking, that is wrong. And that would be more of a best value style where you've got both qualifications and fee. So just getting terminology clear sometimes is something that frustrates the industry. But staying on QBS here a little bit, there are really three main solicitation types that you could use for projects, right? And it's kind of like a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, it's just purely about the money. On the other hand, it's the qualifications. That's the A+. We're looking for the best qualified team and firm. Now, on this left-hand side, when you're doing something that's a solicitation purely decided based upon the money, normally that's called an ITB, an invitation to bid, also known as low bid. It's purely price-based. We're only going to consider the financials, nothing else. And then QBS is on the far other end of the spectrum. We're only looking at qualifications, nothing else. Often this is called an RFQ, which is confusing because to some folks, RFQ means request for quote, which is over here on this left-hand side of essentially being low bid. But to the industry sectors that are used to qualifications-based selection being the norm, they do in fact use the term RFQ over here to mean request for qualifications. And what they're meaning by that is literally zero price. So that's qualifications-based selection. Now, in the middle, you have your RFP, right? This is a best value thing that considers both financials and qualifications. And this, of course, is where CPE tends to focus. We tend to focus on the RFP side of things. I've weighted the RFP a little bit more on the spectrum towards the QBS side because, as you might remember, we do say at CPE, we recommend a maximum weight on price of no more than 35%. So we don't want this to be 50-50. You want to have a good, strong weight towards your qualification side. So that means that CPE's recommendation is that qualification should be 3/4 of the evaluation or more. And we're going to talk about why that is in next month's RFP Doctor. So stay tuned for that. But that's really kind of where our focus is, right? Is we're looking at both the financials and the qualifications. So, what's the deal with this QBS stuff? Let's talk about that a little bit further. So QBS, when you're just looking at qualifications, how is this viewed by the industry community? Well, a little background to be aware of. I know we all love remembering court case names, but this is something that you should be aware of in procurement, and that's something called the Brooks Act from the early 70s. What this act did is it applied purely to the federal government. So at the federal level, it says that federal agencies must use qualifications-based selection when procuring design and engineering services. So again, architecture and engineering services. Although that's at the federal level, 46 of the 50 states have mirrored this for their state procurement policies. These are called mini Brooks Acts. And so we've implemented some sort of QBS law at the state level. Now, the further down you go from the states and you get into more dispersed agencies, the various municipalities, there's counties and cities and townships, the further down you go, the more removed you get from the federal government, the more you start to see changes from traditional QBS. If you're looking at the mini Brooks side of things at the state level, there are some good matrices out there. You can see a screenshot of it here on the right-hand side that tracks things state by state. This is actually tracked by ACEC, which is the American Council of Engineering Companies. If you go to their website, you can find this matrix is where we got it from. And so it has all 46 states that have a specific QBS law, and there are 4 states who do not, as listed there. But even among those 4 who do not have a specific law, you can see, for example, with Iowa, agencies still generally follow QBS. It's just that they don't have a specific law on the books. They haven't, boxed themselves into that format, even though that is the tradition. So whether or not you have a law here or a policy here doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly how it is followed, right? There's some flexibility, but in Iowa, we're still generally going to follow QBS, for example. Here's the spoiler alert for how the industry feels, the industry being the architects, the engineers out there. There are actually 7 state registration boards because these services, right, architects and engineers are licensed through the Board of Technical Professions across the states, at each state individually. 7 of those states and their boards of technical professions actually prohibit their members from responding to an RFP that has a price proposal in there. So you can see those states listed. Now, whether that happens in every single case is of course, going to be a gray area. But the idea of a licensing board saying, our members to be licensed, thou shall never even submit a price is very interesting. And it kind of tips the hand of what does the industry think about introducing fee into the competitive realm. So just to do a quick scan of various architecture and engineering groups, AIA, this is their position statement, and you can find these position statements very front and center on pretty much every one of these professional group websites. But in this case, you see architects, they strongly support qualifications-based selection, and yes, they mean pure QBS, no price. You go to ACEC, American Council of Engineering Companies. They would like to protect and promote the use of QBS. That's in there. NSPE, that's the National Society of Professional Engineers. They also strongly support the Brooks Act. They, in fact, have a map on their website. This is the recent screenshot of it. And all the states highlighted in orange are states where there was some attack, quote unquote, on QBS from their point of view. In other words, states that were moving away from QBS or were considering legislation to move away from QBS. They actually track this and they try to respond to it. Give you a quick example. That's in my home state of Kansas. A handful of years ago, these professional associations learned that the state of Kansas and our DOT had received input from an auditing firm that said that the state might save some money by eliminating QBS and competing fee. That's what the auditor said. Well, in response, you can see here, there's a nice letter that was sent to Kansas legislatures. A copy of it is shown on the next page. I know it's too small to read, but it gives you a sense of how the industry responds. They immediately sent a letter trying to fight back against that audit reports. A little bit of flexing of the muscles early on in the letter, right? Hey, we've got 31,000 members. Just going to remind you of that. We live and work in your states. And by the way, we had this other study done in the past, and that study showed that QBS is the best thing since sliced bread, and you really shouldn't listen to this auditor. That's kind of the basics of that report. So when you go back here to our map, that's what this map means, is these professional associations who represent architects and engineers are tracking to see are states and other public entities moving away from a pure QBS. So if you are currently in your organization asking for fee in association to A&E services, just keep this broader perspective and environments present in your minds, because this is what's being fought for on behalf of the A&E companies. So in short, how does the A&E community view QBS? Well, like this, it is an absolutely hot button issue for them. Absolutely hot button issue that they're really focused on. Now, lest you believe that this is only looked at by A&E firms, I will mention the Design Build Institute of America, which represents obviously design build firms, which are typically led by GC primes, so contractor primes in those relationships, as one of the most common setups for a design build project. Well, they have also started tracking a map of how states are procuring design build specifically, and they're starting to track states that use pure qualifications-based selection just for design builds, and they're trying to get this to grow over time too. So again, this will be coming from all sides now, not just A&E, but now you've got the large design build firms and design build associated contractors looking at this too through the DBIA. So all that backgrounds. And I'll put Jeff on the spot here to chime in when you want with any other additional commentary from our side at CPE. You're welcome to speak up, Jeff. But here's the basic summary of the recommendation from CPE, the Center for Procurement Excellence. Our thoughts on QBS. Number one is, of course, we're going to tell you follow the rules. If you are an agency that is beholden to the Brooks Act or a mini Brooks Act, or you have policy on the books, you must follow your policy. That being said, if you have flexibility, we do recommend that fee is considered in the appropriate manner and to the appropriate level. And the basic idea behind this and why CPE takes this stance is just that it's as simple as what's shown here. Procurement is the steward of how public finances are dispersed, and we must act in the taxpayer's best interest. And just on face value, I know there's a lot of detail behind what I'm about to say, but on face value, to lock ourselves into a negotiation with a single firm who we already told is the one that we think is the best, and then hope those negotiations work out in the taxpayer's best interest, it just stretches the imagination a little bit. Not saying there's anything that's foul play or anything that's out of bounds. That is how the industry has worked in the past. But if you're purely looking at this from our job is to represent the taxpayers and do a good job of that on the public procurement side, then it only makes sense to have some level of cost competition considered, but of course, appropriately. And you have to, if you're going to do it appropriately, just know there's going to be pushback likely, and there's that whole environments and backdrop that we've already covered of kind of how the industry looks at things. So some tips and best practices if you go down that route. Some to go through. Number one is you really do have to limit the weight of that fee information. We're talking about design services where there's usually a very limited scope that's identified. And so in that case, this is not going to be one of the areas that you want to push up to that maximum 35% on the fee. You want to keep it much more limited just because you're introducing a little bit of competition here, not because you think it's the end all be all of how you should select design consultants. That's not at all what we're saying. If you're going to ask for it, provide a proposal form so that you set a clear expectation of how you're looking at this information, and you're getting consistent responses from the industry, not just a variety of rate cards and things like that. Number three, a 2-envelope approach. Absolutely do not reveal that fee to your evaluation team at any point in the evaluation process until all of those qualifications have been scored and accounted for. Number four, you have to keep in mind that your statement of work, your scope, your requirements, your project descriptions, your project objectives are really important to allow the design community to give you an appropriate fee or range of fees. If you don't provide much information about the project, it's very difficult for them to come up with something, right? You're asking them to kind of pull something out of thin air. So if you are not providing a solid benchmark for them to plan around, if you're not doing a good job of encouraging questions and feedback and interaction throughout your RFP and RFQ process, that's going to be a challenge. In other words, if you try to cram the RFP timeline down the community's throats and not give much time, and they can't digest, they can't be thinking, they can't be asking questions, you're not making yourself available for that, well, that's going to increase pushback, because that is how the design community wants to be thinking about partnering with you as a client is, what are you really after? What are you thinking? What are your objectives? How are you viewing things? What type of partner are you going to be in terms of healthy relationship to work with. All of that matters into how things are put together in terms of a fee. So if you're hiding all that or pushing that aside, it's a very difficult thing to ask the community to do. Next up, being transparent. Absolutely publish your budget for the project, of course, and kind of that should go without saying for design services, but we will say it here. But another big thing that is sometimes overlooked is, do you have a schedule expectation of how long this should take, whether you're super confident in it or not? Try to make sure that you're looking at both the project budget and timeline in a consistent manner that is apples to apples across the community. If you do not do this, then different timeline assumptions that are made are going to affect fee, and that's something that has to be considered. There's case studies on that and detail behind that, but that's the basic recommendation. Another one, check the team. As part of your evaluation process, do not make it just about the firm and the firm's overall portfolio, but hey, if you're going to look at a fee, who are you getting for that fee? That's important to know. At least know the key team members that you are being proposed as part of that QBS process. That probably goes without saying in most of this A&E selection, because you're wanting a good team, but you have to keep that in mind. If you just looked at the logo and the firm overall, and you don't really know who you're getting for that fee, then you're not looking at an apples to apples comparison. Leverage experience. Ensure that you are very familiar with how A&E services are procured, delivered, how to work with these firms. If this is new for you, well, it's going to be a little bit harder to introduce fee and really know how to navigate those waters if you're not familiar as an agency with this type of work. So just caution there, reach out, ask a friend, ask an expert who's been through this type of thing before. And then last but not least, effective partnering. Make sure we give the selected A&E, after you've gone through the evaluations, give them time to coordinate with you, to clarify things prior to contracts. That means a few discussions are helpful as you're going through the contracting process. It helps them gear up and feel more confident in how things have settled out in terms of what the project is about, what the goals are. Let them confirm those things. That goes a long way. And then finally, last thing I'll mention, back to following the rules. Perhaps a little known thing about CPE is we do have experience in putting together solid public procurement policy guidelines and procedures around RFPs and how to ask for fee, how to move away from low bid primarily, but also how to do a good job in RFPs. So if ever there's an agency or a state or whoever out there who is looking to adjust their policies around purchasing in the built environment, so design, construction, et cetera, then certainly treat CPE as a resource. We've helped with those policy developments in the past. We have sample language. We're happy to brainstorm and have those conversations. So yes, follow the rules. And I know that there are also procedures for adjusting rules and updating them. So keep that in mind as well. With that, I'll pause and come to any immediate questions before we go into the next side. Jeff, I wanted to open up to you. I forgot to check if you had comments earlier on.
Go back 2 slides.
Yes, sir. This big one.
Yeah. So some of you may or may not know is I spent the first 10 plus years of my career in engineering consulting, and most of my friends are actually architects. Matter of fact, my daughter-in-law is an architect, and I've had long discussions over the years, over my career, about this particular subject. And most of my friends would probably
Cash?
most of my friends would probably agree that if everybody met most of these requirements, they would be much more receptive to a non-QBS selection process. But because they're so can you guys hear me? Okay.
There we go.
Because they're challenged in the way they're done. We've seen some stuff in Kansas and other places where it was almost low bid for architects, and that's just wrong, right, in my opinion. So when we do it the right way, there'll be less pushback, but there will always be the classic thinking, especially from architects, that they have art in their name, that hey, we should be selected on our abilities. And that's fine too, especially if you're doing some sort of iconic building or sculpture or something like that, but that's not what we're talking about here. So I think my only comment is that that part of the industry challenges around this is the way we've always done it, and then the hybrids of the way we've done it with price and not have done it very well. That's all I have, Brian.
No, I want to echo that, right? Is a lot of times I'm actually on the AIA qualifications-based selection and government action committee. Those are two separate groups. But one of their most common complaints is they have members across the architect community who see RFPs and send them in to AIA and complain and say, hey, can we step in and stop the owner from doing this? And the most common complaint is, hey, this owner is asking for a fee. But it's really not that. When you dig into each of the scenarios, it's usually because there's about 12 different things that are wrong with that RFP or RFQ process, not just the fee part. It's usually because half or more of these items on the screen are totally messed up alongside with doing something that the community was not expecting with fees. So Jeff's spot on that. If we could just do all of these things that are shown on the screen and have a good solid RFP process, you'd have a lot less pushback. It's because some of these basics are also lacking while we're doing things that the industry wasn't expecting.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.